Stasia Williams, will spend the next hour talking about diversity and inclusion and how it can be successfully used to identify and implement needed changes in our organizations to be truly diverse and inclusive. It is really a great time to be talking about this topic. 2020 was an unprecedented year. We were held captive by a worldwide pandemic that actually played a significant part in focusing our attention on the many social justice issues that have impacted the Black community in this country for decades and even longer. We've seen everything from implicit bias to micro inequities to blatant racism impact Black people. But in the words of my favorite poet, Maya Angelou, and still I rise. As a member of the Pepperdine community, I want to thank you as alumni for your continued engagement with our school. You play a vital role in helping our school to continue to develop and grow into the organization that we all know that it can be. As a professor, I've leaned on your knowledge and experience as a valuable tool for my current students. And lucky for me, as the start of the call showed, I've actually can count many of you as friends. As such, I hope that you stay engaged with us and continue to give back like you have so graciously in the past. And I actually think, Jason, you may have some information you're going to pop in the chat about how alumni can stay engaged in a variety of different ways. Now, I only had a little bit of time, and I want to get to the important part, which is why you're here, to listen to these experts. So with that, let me introduce our moderator for today's session, Stasia Williams. Stasia is a managing director at First Foundation, Inc., where she works directly with high net worth individuals, families, and nonprofits with asset management and wealth building. She's also very active outside of First Foundation, where she is currently a board chair for organizations like Driving Force Group, is an executive board member and treasurer for Women in Film, and is a board member for Cast LA. Stasia's received a lot of awards for all that she has done, and some of them include National Sales Network Woman in Sales Excellence Award, the National STEM Top Woman of Color in Finance Award, the American Cancer Society Award of Merit, the Los Angeles NAACP Outstanding Leader of the Year Award, and in 2019 was actually named Graziadio Business School's Distinguished Alum. And on a personal note, I'll say as a Black professor new to the school and new to Southern California, she was so gracious, and I want to thank her for reaching out to me to say, hey, if you ever need anything, let me know. And I have reached out, and she has helped out. And that's what being an alumni is all about. So with that, I want to again thank the panel for being here. And Stasia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Tribute. Voices of Justice is the theme for Pepperdine's Black History Month celebration. And I am also going to quote Dr. Maya Angelou, who is one of those great voices. And she said, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going, unquote. Historian Dr. Carter G. Woodson and Reverend Jesse Moreland launched the first Black History celebration back in 1915. And that was corresponding with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and President Abraham Lincoln. Initially, celebrations were for a week, asking critical questions about heritage and accomplishments in light of the promises of equality espoused in the 14th Amendment. Eventually, Black History celebrations evolved into a month during the Civil Rights era of the 1960s. Black history continues to reflect lived experiences today with the January 20th inauguration of Vice President Kamala Harris. Black history is American history, just as Dr. Tribute mentioned earlier, and the Kinsey African American History Collection is a great example of how Black history is amplified throughout the year. I want to thank President Jim Gash for his leadership and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for featuring longtime mentors and fellow alums Bernard and Shirley Kinsey and their phenomenal collection as a part of this February speaker series. I also want to express appreciation to Dean Derek Van Rensburg and Christine Bishop for their ongoing support and for the invitation to serve as the moderator for today's Leading Edge conversation. Behind the scenes, let me express gratitude to Robin and Jason. And today is Jason's last day with Pepperdine, and we want to celebrate him and wish him great success on his journey. And I also want to thank my husband, who is also a Pepperdine alum, Michael Washington. So it's been less than 1 year since the summer of protests following the police killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. In that short period of time, there has been a 90% increase in the hiring of diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals. Think about that for a moment. Out of respect for DEI executives with many years experience leading the conversation in corporate America and academia, I want to establish that I am not an expert, but I do bring a deep passion to this conversation as an African-American financial executive committed to closing the wealth gap that directly affects communities of color. Diversity, equity, and inclusion experts should not shoulder the primary responsibility for elevating this conversation. It's everyone's job, and those of us that are in positions of influence in corporate America and academia should be a part of that conversation and help those folks out. Today's panelists are all Pepperdine alums, and they are experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's my pleasure to introduce Ronald Berryman, MBA 67. He's the CEO and president of Berryman & Company. Ron has been a certified management consultant for over 30 years and has served on the board of directors of Pepperdine for 18 years. Raymond Hall, MBA 19, PKE 141. He is head of human resources for Americas for JLL. Raymond partners with the firm's businesses to acquire, develop, engage, and reward employees. Raymond sits on the global HR leadership team and America's Executive Committee, working closely with the CEO. Kristen Wally is EDD 08, MBA 1998, has spent the past 20 years at ADP as Senior Vice President responsible for global payments and compliance. Kristen is a specialist change agent, highly skilled in managing cross-functional, cross-cultural teams as a financial and operational executive. I'd like to start by asking our panelists, and I'm going to start with Ron. How would you define diversity today?
Well, let's look at it. What does it actually mean? It means variety. It means a medley. It means a mixture. Webster defines it as a situation having composed of many elements. In the sphere that we're talking about today, diversity encompasses looking at all of the different elements in a work environment that comprise the total employee and workforce and impacts the stakeholders. Diversity is very key for any organization as it relates to marketing, for instance. The more diverse population that we have in the workforce, the better brand that we create, and it expands our target markets across the board. Operational, it could save us a lot of time with turnover and absenteeism. And it's innovative. It could enhance our product development because we engage many different people associated with our organization. I like to compare diversity to an analogy of a salad bowl approach. In the salad, we have different ingredients, right? That will comprise and make up a great salad. Well, this is kind of a euphemistic way of saying we should approach that same dynamic in a work organization. It will do nothing but enhance our productivity and our profitability. Thank you.
Thank you. Raymond, please share your definition of equity.
Thanks. And when I think about equity, is one word that comes to mind is fairness. In the context of what I do every day here at JLL, or how I advise management teams of companies that I work with, I think about promoting fairness and ensuring impartiality, irrespective of differences, ensuring everyone has the same opportunities to achieve their full potential. So when you ask me about equity, that's how I define it.
Thank you. Kristen, please define inclusion.
Inclusion is really about how well I'm utilizing the contributions of my diverse workforce. So asking myself as the leader, have I integrated all of the perspectives of the different groups of people that are in my organization into how I work and in all aspects of that work?
Thank you. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists to talk about how DEI factors into each of your personal and professional interactions. Okay.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in. I'll start. So folks that know me, there's not really a huge distinction between my professional and personal. And so what does that really mean? I feel like as a leader, I need to be embodying what diversity and inclusion is, no matter where I'm at, if I'm in my professional life or my personal. And luckily for me at ADP, we have a ton of business resource groups. So the capability of me being an executive sponsor for our West Coast LGBT community, the capability of me being an executive mentor to our African American community, that happens in ADP, but then also outside of ADP at another university. I'm also an executive corporate mentor for the Student Center for Professional Development. So I'm really helping the individuals, the next generation of leaders. So for me, it's how am I spending my time? Who am I spending my time with? And what actions am I taking, whether that is professionally or personally?
Thank you. Ron?
Stasia, I can go next.
Go ahead.
I think personally, it really drives me to think about the interactions that I have every day. I find myself asking, am I doing something that might make another person around me feel excluded? So it makes me have more empathy in my everyday interactions, because I just simply don't know what another person's journey has been like or what their daily struggle is. So it helps me keep things in perspective. Professionally, is what keeps me awake at night. Leading a global organization, I find myself asking, how can we really gain traction here? As you know, there were several events in 2020 that brought to life the importance of DEI. But for me, we need to now pivot to action and create a better tomorrow for everyone.
Thank you. Ron?
Yes, thank you. Personally, I've been an adjunct professor for over 10, 12 years. I interface personally with students across the board, and I try to be cognizant at all times about the diversity issue and the equity issue. And I also counsel, both Caucasian students, Asian students, Black students, et cetera, Hispanic students. But I also try to relate to them the importance of them bringing something to the table, and that there's no entitlement, that they have to put some points on the board. And I try to do it very judiciously and in all honesty. And I can say that over the years, I've maintained good relationships with my undergraduate and graduate students. Professionally, in the consulting arena, I think you have to be cognizant of the DEI factor. Quite often, our firm was formed after the Watts riots in 1968, and it was a federal mandate for companies to have affirmative action plans as it related to employment, as well as to procurement opportunities. So our firm was retained by many Fortune 500 companies to help develop their affirmative action plans dealing with diversity, the importance of it, the importance of affirmative action, the importance of giving minority folks and people of color procurement opportunities. And that's been kind of like the mission of my life in dealing in this whole area. So I consciously think about it both professionally and personally on a daily basis. Thank you.
And I have to thank you, Ron, for being a mentor for me early in my career, because our lunches were always invaluable, and I just really appreciate your groundbreaking leadership.
My pleasure indeed. My heart and soul is in it. And that's one of the reasons why my wife and I were compelled to do something in this area. And at the Graziadio School, we were honored and humbled to establish the Berryman Scholarship for African-American students pursuing their MBA degrees. So that brings us a lot of joy every day.
Well, we thank you. Okay, next question. This is for Kristen. What advice would you give to leaders new to DEI?
So I have three items. First, be open to someone else's perspectives of the same events. So I don't know how many of you have siblings. I have a brother and a sister. So sometimes this can be eye-opening. We all lived in the same house. We all experienced the same event, but I somehow, being the oldest, got away with certain things. My thinking for them is they got away with others. And so in the workplace, that happens. We all experience the same event, but we bring ourselves to it with a different perspective. So really understand somebody else's perspective, that same event may be different than yours. Secondly, I would say listen to understand. Put aside your own biases, understand you have those biases, understand you view the world in a certain way, and truly hear what the other person is saying and what they're meaning by what they're saying. And then third, get involved. So most companies have an opportunity to volunteer. Do that with a group that you wouldn't self-identify as. So be an ally. I have to tell you, a tremendous amount of personal insight can be gained just by being part of a group that you normally wouldn't be part of. So be involved and take action.
Thank you. So as far as action, what attributes must a leader embody to make DEI actionable? And I'll start with you, Raymond.
Yes, that's a good question. At JLL, diversity, equity, inclusion is not a HR program or an initiative, it's a business imperative. And so for us, it should be leader-led. And so when you think about the attributes a leader must have, I think there are four. The first is courage. It takes courage to stand up to do what's right every day. Sometimes I know it may feel easy to just go with the flow, but in order to create sustainable change, leaders must be courageous to stand up against inequality, even when the conversation is hard. The second area is self-awareness. Even the most inclusive leaders have blind spots, we all do. So constantly looking for ways to improve and understand your own biases is important. The third area is empathy, being able to walk in someone else's shoes and be mindful that their journey is typically unseen or unspoken, especially in a professional setting. And the last area is a great communicator. Leaders who speak often about DEI not only set the stage in terms of its importance, but they also enforce what it means to them personally.
That's great. Thank you so much. Ron, did you want to expand on that?
Yes, to complement and piggyback on Raymond's comments, yet we need leaders who are authentic, committed, and engaged. And we need leaders from all sectors, from the educational sector, from the government sector, from the business sector. You know, and we need those leaders who will actively promote diversity and policies to support and mitigate discrimination in all forms.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Stasia.
Thank you. So my next question really speaks from a corporate and academic perspective, and we're bringing back in Professor Tribute to participate in this question. What is the biggest challenge in DEI at the moment? Mark, you want to start?
Sure. First, let me apologize because I think I called you Stasia Williams instead of Stasia Washington. So I wanted to clear that up first and foremost. Sincerest apologies. So your question is about the biggest challenges, I think. I think one of the biggest challenges is that there are many. So I guess I'll focus in on, I think people are struggling, people that are not marginalized struggle in that they see this as a zero-sum game. So an improvement by one group or standing by one group means that response, I'm going to lose something, right? And so I think that that is an issue that we need to get to the heart of, to show people that actually, if we stop marginalizing different groups, we all win. Just really briefly, in my academic, I'm reading this book. It's called The Sum of Us, and it's an economic perspective on diversity and inclusion. And they get into some of these issues. So I think that's one of the major problems that we need to overcome.
That's fantastic. And actually, someone just sent that book to me as well. So I'm looking forward to reading it.
Nice.
We'll talk about the financial dynamics around DEI in a moment, but I'm glad you opened that up. Raymond, do you want to talk about the challenges from a corporate perspective?
Yes, I've been thinking about too. And Stasia, I've been working at D&I for probably the last 20 years, both as a practitioner and as an HR leader. And I actually don't think it's as complicated as we sometimes make it out to be. I believe what it comes down to is for organizations to really having a deep level commitment and then translating words into action. If you recall last summer, during the racial unrest here in the US, we saw a lot of corporations come out with very aggressive statements, a lot centered around we stand with Black people in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, things of that sort. But what does that actually mean for our people? And what are we going to do as corporations to make their lives better? So we have to translate words into action. I think the number one spectator sport in business is boss watching. So our employees are no longer just hearing what we say, but more importantly, they're watching what we do.
Yes, that's fantastic. That is so critical. And that leads me to another topic. I'm going to take a pivot here. Let's talk about microaggressions. And, we talk about DEI, and microaggressions really are weaved into our day-to-day life. And it's the little things. And someone once told me that microaggressions could be defined as death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so with that, an example would be someone saying, when I see you, I don't see color. And this basically says your Blackness is not acknowledged and I won't hold it against you. Another, which a lot of us have heard multiple times throughout our careers, wow, you're so articulate, signaling that Black people are not usually capable of competent conversations. So how should Black students, employees, and leaders respond to microaggressions they face, given the real or perceived backlash endured for speaking up? Ron?
Yes, this is a very delicate area, and it's a very unique, and it's different in each instance. And I think we as students, employers, professors, leaders, etc., have to be somewhat concerned on how we deal with microaggression, because it could impact, our ability to move up the corporate ladder. Because as we move up in the corporate ladder, it becomes much more social. So we have to use our emotional intelligence in dealing with these delicate situations. I mean, and how we fend it off it's different. I don't think we should be concerned with backlash, but we can be very honest. We will have to, indicate that we have courage and commitment and conviction in our stance, but at the same time, we want to be respectful of others, and hopefully we can dispel any aggression, techniques that people will employ. But again, it's an individual thing, and it's very delicate.
It is. And to that point, Kristen, why don't you share at this point, especially around microaggressions, what it means to be an ally?
Yeah, and so I agree with Ron and Raymond. I love, people are watching me as a leader. So how am I approaching this as a leader? What can I control? And I'll say, you said that we were all experts. I will not say I'm an expert in DEI. I'm learning all of the time. So I'm gonna put that out there. So the easiest part of this conversation is, as a leader, having a conversation with my team. So my direct reports, my leadership when I'm having an associate roundtable, when I'm having a global town hall, really have figure out a way for everyone to be comfortable and to be able to speak up and have a conversation. So this is by far what I can control. I will say the more difficult part is when it's happening in a situation. So if it's directed at me, I can sit there and say, seriously, that's what you're thinking about women? So it's easy. But for me, when I don't know the rules, are you feeling that it was a microaggression versus I feel it myself? So when I don't know the rules, I'll have to say, I try, I stumble, I learn, I try again, I have conversation, but I try to take action. And so Raymond, I just love, it's what actions are we taking? I can sit here and theorize and talk about everything, but what are those actions? So as a leader, taking action, talking and having a conversation, talking to the individual when I perceive, I don't want to step in and save them, but by the same token, I'm not here to, how were you feeling about that? And so take action and learning so I can continue to improve my own understanding and how I show up as a leader. And so I'm still I have good days and I have bad days. And so just being open to having people giving me that feedback and saying, hey, Kristen, what were you thinking? And going, okay, well, what did I do? And help me. I'm pretty self-aware, I'm pretty emotionally intelligent, but boy, do sometimes I step in it. And so having people that can help me is super important. So the best way to be an ally is to allow people to tell me I'm stepping in it at any given time.
Thank you for being so authentic with your question, with your answer, and that leads me to a conversation about showing up from an authentic perspective. So, how can employees and leaders authentically approach inclusivity? And I'm going to start with Raymond.
Yes, I believe it starts with humility. There's a ton of research out there that shows when awareness of biases combined with high levels of humility, it can increase feelings of inclusion by as much as 25%, which is big. So we should start by educating ourselves. Even if you've taken a D&I course, take another one. Or better yet, spend some time with a colleague who has different experiences than you, and try to learn more about their experiences and their challenges. The other thing I would say is get off the sidelines and get involved. If you want someone to be a champion for the things that are important to you, show your support for them and try to understand what their challenges are and how you can help.
That's great. Thank you. Ron?
Yes, and I think also it's a two-way street. I think the leaders in organizations will have to concentrate on developing mentees who are people of color that will help them, along the progression line and help them to ascend to higher heights. And I think also the opposite end, the employees should start looking at the corporate leaders or at least second, third, fourth level managers that could be their mentors. So I think that's a very successful approach. Again, the direction has to come from the top. It has to come from the board. It has to come from the CEO. In most businesses, we have both. We have the financial statement and we have the social statement, and each one complements each other. And until we get the social situation right, we're going to not have the optimum type of business environment. So I think it's a two-pronged approach. We need mentors. We need mentees to help us grow and prosper. Thank you.
Kristen?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much more to add because I definitely agree with both gentlemen. It's very humbling when somebody walks in my door and gives me a piece of their vulnerability. How I choose to act at that moment defines me as a leader, but then also defines what the organization and the people in the organization say about me. So am I truly my best? And this past year has been very difficult. I've had a woman who has a white mother, a Black father, come in and express to me what's happening in her household. And being there in a vulnerable moment, okay, what can I do to support? How can I help you? when I don't have that experience, being able to listen and take action is super important as leaders. And so, Raymond, I seriously, action, action, action. I'm an action-oriented person, and we need action, and we need people to help each other. And so if you're a mentee, find somebody you trust, walk through the door. And if you're a mentor, then pull somebody up, and somebody that maybe doesn't look, act, or even have the same experience as you. Because I will tell you, I learn more from my mentees than they probably do from me. And so how do we help each other on this journey called life?
That's great. And all of us, oh, wow, I'm sorry, I'm echoing here now. I'm going to go to the next question. According to a recent study of America's growing wealth gap conducted by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, organizations with ethnic and cultural diversity outperformed by 33%, and diverse companies enjoy 2 to 3 times higher cash flow per employee. Obviously, DEI is good for business. How do you suggest leaders incorporate DEI into their overarching business strategy? Raymond?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And at JLL, we believe DEI is not just good for business, but it's good for the communities that we serve as well. I often partner with our leadership team, exploring 2 to 3 business problems that can be solved with diversity as part of the solution. A good example of ways you can incorporate this is think about your go-to-market strategy. I think developing an understanding of what's important to your clients or customers is critically important. And to do this effectively, you need to have a team around the table that brings diverse perspectives, backgrounds, and ideas, which actually leads to greater innovation and more effective customer and client engagements.
Thank you. That's fantastic leadership. Kristen, what are a few best practices for building inclusion into an organization's leadership succession plan?
So this is so right on. This is exactly what I'm doing right now at ADP. It's our annual talent pipeline exploration. And so I'll say we do have specific targets of groups. So this, talking about coming from the organization, coming from the leadership at the top. But I would say what I do with my team is integrate all of our perspectives. So it's not just myself with my HR business partner. It's what are we looking to accomplish, and who is in the conversation for that talent pipeline, and how are we looking at diversity to look at the next generation of leaders, to have that diverse slate. So it's including all voices, and where do we find leaders that we might not know of. And so by having that diverse team and looking at that pipeline on how we should influence, we could really end up with a much better slate of individuals to pull up as our next generation. So it's having the conversation, taking action, be meaningful. So once we have our high potential individuals, then also looking at their development plan and looking at what experiences are we providing and who's helping to sponsor and mentor. So then that way we can ensure success as much as possible.
That's fantastic. Ron and Raymond, I mean, this is such an important question around succession planning and how that weaves it. I just want to open it up and see if the two of you want to comment as well. Okay, we'll go on. Not a problem. It's often said that the tone starts at the top. So what role can boards assume to help leadership advance an organization inclusion agenda? And Raymond, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think a board can help organizations in 3 core areas. First, they play a critical role in helping the management team set the overall strategic direction, establish the priorities, the investments required to really drive D&I. They also can help advance inclusion by ensuring companies are hiring diverse executives and that the DEI is integrated into the overall business strategy, and that companies have the needed resources that are being allocated to advance these efforts. Most importantly, though, they have to hold management accountable and ensure there are good metrics in place to track and measure the progress being made.
Accountability is essential. I mean, you talk about action, we have to have accountability go along with the action. And so, Ron, What suggestions do you have for boards to shift into an inclusion governance mindset?
Yes, our firm has been very honored and humbled to work with both the federal sector, state and municipal governments in laying out their strategies for looking at diversity and affirmative action. So we do this, we lay out the infrastructure and our recommendations, and they employ that. Now that would be on the macro side. On the micro side, we've been retained by major Fortune 500 companies to devise an implementation plan that would adhere to the government strategies. And, we're retained or have been retained monthly to evaluate their ongoing performance. I'm pretty much retired from the consulting after about 40 years of doing this, but I hope Professor Tribbitt is listening to me, because he could certainly take advantage of the new government guidelines associated with this. I know he does some strategic consulting, but I think there is a great opportunities in this area from a government perspective and also from a board perspective.
Fantastic. So,
Ron, I always listen when you speak, always.
Thank you.
all right, now you have to take action.
Thank you.
So in September 2020, California enacted SB 979, which requires California-based public companies to increase diversity through a phased-in requirement by 2023. Other states are actively considering similar legislation. So Raymond, what advice would you give public companies and private company board directors in light of the mandates of SB 979?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the gender recruitment round, the focus on finding women who already had public board knowledge, that was kind of the focus area. And that pool is now fairly exhausted, and companies are not having to hire capable female executives for who this position is new. I mean, this is their first board role. So given this, my advice to companies when hiring and selecting new board members would be to ensure you have a strategic, proactive selection, assessment, and development plan to find the right people to create board cohesion. This shouldn't be viewed as a compliance play, but instead viewed as an opportunity to include more high point talent into boards.
Great, thank you so much. So in closing, with our panelists, and these are the questions that we all worked on together, and we're going to have more, of course, from all of you. I also empower everyone to think critically about how you can use your power to affect change as it pertains to DEI. Each of our individual actions can have a lasting impact. Ask yourself, what can you and your organization do to promote equity and justice? And I really want to put an emphasis on equity as well. And there's a lot of conversation over the years about diversity, which tend to be quota-based. Equity and inclusion are much more intentional. And so all of your voices matter. And I want to thank Ron, Raymond, and Kristen for your thoughtful answers. And we are Pepperdine proud. And I'll turn it over to Jason.
Great, thank you so much, Stasia, Ron, Raymond, and Kristen for the amazing, wonderful, and rich dialogue today. So we have several questions coming into the chat. So I'm going to start off the Q&A with a question, and then I'm going to bring in a current student from our full-time MBA program who will ask a couple of questions as well. So the first question is from Giuseppe Nespoli. Thinking about experiencing or witnessing microaggressions, what is a way of calling in people instead of calling them out?
Is that directed to any one person?
That is directed to the panel as a whole.
Well, I think, and give my best to Giuseppe, he's been a great Pepperdine graduate alum and a part of the Graziadio School for many years. He recently had the opportunity of taking on another assignment, so I sent out my best. But yeah, we gotta bring them in sometimes. We gotta pull their coat. We gotta bring them inside and say, you know, hey, this is cool or this is not cool. And let me tell you a little about being honest and of going forward, how you won't make the same mistake. I wouldn't call them out. I would call them in. And I think that's a good approach. And that's a very good question by Giuseppe. I would have a one-on-one with him and speak my heart.
Yeah,
Ron,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Ron, I agree with that. But in order for people to feel comfortable having those heart-to-heart conversations, you have to have the right culture, and leadership needs to set the tone in terms of not having people who bring these issues forward to feel like there may be some sort of retaliation on the backside of it.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is that, and I might have a slightly different perspective, but on the same continuum as you two, I feel like these tough conversations kind of have to be had. It's kind of where we're in this, you know, but I do feel like if you can build trust, if I trust you, if I have some trust in a relationship with you and you tell me that I did something wrong, I'm more likely to accept it and internalize it and do something with it. So it's a multiple, it's kind of a longer term solution to the inaction that happened in the moment. And so that's the only other piece I would add to that. I think you guys are both right though.
Good point.
And Mark, I think that's such a good point. That's why when I was saying you kind of fumble through it, right? I'm not always the most articulate person, but what I can say is when I come from a place of this is how it made me feel, you can't discount how I feel. And I'm going to fumble through and I'm going to tell you how I feel. And depending upon the person that I'm interacting with, I could come off and just say, hey, seriously? Or I could be like, hey, something happened. I need to talk to you. This is how it made me feel. And I will say that, you know, I've had some difficult conversations with my boss on not that topic, but other topics. And when I come from the place of, this is how this statement made me feel, a lot of times he's oblivious, completely like, what? That was not my intent. And so I'm like, well, it might not have been your intent, but this is how it came across to me. And then we have a good conversation and it builds the trust. And so sometimes, and yes, it is very culture-based, it's very leadership. And that's why I was saying before, like if I don't know the rules, it's a little bit harder, but I fumble into it and then I learn. And sometimes it's like, oh, didn't feel good, but at least I got it out. So I'm not berating myself for not stepping and taking action, because the last thing I want to do is just walk away and not do something at all, because then it gnaws on me.
Great point.
Great point.
Great point, yeah.
Great. Thank you all for the wonderful dialogue there. I would like to bring in current student Jordan Zuber-Banks. He is a candidate for the full-time MBA program with the Graziadio Business School, and he is the founder and president of Business Students of Color Association and Allies. And Jordan will ask 2 questions to the panel.
Thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start off by thanking the panelists for their time and insights throughout this entire event. In line with Dr. Tribbitt's introductory remarks, I believe that celebrations highlighting Black excellence and unfiltered dialogues emphasizing the struggles therein are necessary, and I really appreciate you all for using your platforms to make such an impact. Circling back to the statistics that Ms. Washington cited at the beginning of this discussion regarding the momentum behind the current push for diversity, equity, and inclusion, in your opinion, what is the price to pay, and more to the point, who pays it if companies and institutions are slow to act in their implementation of DE&I initiatives?
I'll be happy to help answer that question. You know, the difference between profit and loss in a lot of corporations is how we capture the diverse elements of our consumer base. The difference between profit and loss is how we market and how we capture and how we sell the minority communities across the board. Not only minorities in all the other areas, you know, gender, sexual persuasion, religious, etc. So more companies now are realizing that it isn't out of missionary zeal, quote unquote, but it's just good business sense to expand our marketing base and capture a larger audience that will hit bottom line. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Just add from an academic perspective, actually the research shows it. Diverse leadership teams they're slower to make decisions, but their decisions are much more in-depth and valuable. And that goes right to the bottom line. There's tons and tons of research out there that looks at various demographic diversity, gender diversity, and how that impacts the business, the bottom line. And almost all of those research studies, it shows benefit, shows that there is a positive outcome to diversity.
Yeah, Jordan, in terms of losers and who pays the price, in my opinion, if you don't do this well, everybody loses. We can talk about the financial aspects all day, but from a corporate perspective, you have to think about your brand in the marketplace. And if you don't set the right environment, if you're not operating inclusively, you're going to continue to bleed talent, and news travels fast.
That's
and so
true.
Beyond just the financial piece, there's your standing in the communities that you serve that's equally as important. And so you all lose.
That's very true.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for your insights. I really appreciate that. Switching gears, more so focusing towards the celebration of the excellence that's within this call right now. I'd really appreciate any advice from the panel, from myself and other grad students on the call, in just how you went about, or if we were going about trying to replicate the level of success that you've enjoyed throughout your careers. Is there anything that we should be focusing on now or further down the road in our careers?
I like to comment on that initially. We have to put some points on the board. I mentor a lot of students and professional people, and there's no entitlement, or we can't say that just because we're a person of color, we're not going to make it. If you can conceive, you can achieve. And it takes a lot of hard work, and you got to put points on the board. You got to be very diligent. You got to work hard. And when you do that, most of the time, it will come back in blessings to you as you go up the corporate ladder. There are no free lunches, my man. Okay.
I can add a point. Having 2 college kids at home right now, the one thing that I tell my girls is let them tell you no. Don't tell yourself no before you get started. There are a lot of people that are going to tell you no. Believe in yourself, go for it all, and see where that takes you.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's such a great point. And I'll say that what I usually tell people is ask, ask, ask. So don't be afraid to ask. A lot of us are, because we're afraid of hearing that no. I will tell you, I've heard many no's. I've raised my hand for special assignments and I was told no. I tried to interview for a position and I was told, oh my gosh, there's no way. 2 years afterwards, that position was reporting to me. And I will tell you, I've also told people no. I've been honest with people and saying, I don't see leadership potential in you. This is what I feel is missing. And while you could be a very successful leader, you won't be a successful leader in my organization, because this is the culture that I have. This is what I'm expecting my leaders to display. And so find people, find the culture, ask away, and have that persistence and that perseverance to articulate what you're looking for and who you believe can help you. And people are out there. Somebody on this panel can help you. Somebody in this session can help you. Don't be afraid to ask a stranger or ask somebody for the introduction to the person. Myself, I came here because Elizabeth saw something out on LinkedIn and asked me to participate in another venue. So you never know what's going to happen.
I'm just going to add that no is an opportunity for yes. I always look at that as a comma. So, and then pivot, just make the adjustment, do a You need to do a self-inventory and see where are your gaps, what do you need to do to fill those gaps, and then keep moving forward, and be resilient. You know, you can always bounce back, right? The rubber ball of your career is just that, as a rubber ball. You can always bounce back. Your family, your friends, your faith, your health are all made out of glass. You drop those balls, they can shatter, but the one that's your career is made out of rubber.
Yeah. The other thing, Stasia, I would say is treat feedback as a gift. Surround yourself with truth tellers, people who are really going to be honest with you about where some of those opportunities for development and growth are. I mean, candor is caring. I mean, that's how, you know, I was brought up in terms of both personally and through my professional career. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today had I not surrounded myself with people who would actually give me really good feedback. And so when you get that feedback, treat it as a gift.
And I just want to address, Courtney, I see that culture is defined by the lens in the chat by where you come from. So I do mentor a lot of students that have, neither parent has never gone to college. And so seeking out people, know what your background is, know what might be a blind spot for you, and seek out people that can help you with that if you don't have that in your own family or your own network. So figure out where you want to go. Don't hear the no, ask for it, and then find somebody that's willing to help you out of your background or what you perceive that you don't have.
Jordan, those are all very cogent statements. You know, I came from 36 in Western Avenue. My mother was a housekeeper. And you know where 36 in Western is, right? That's in the hood. And my first job was as a clerk. And I have to thank God for Pepperdine, because if it were not for Pepperdine, I couldn't have excelled. But I went from a clerk to end up being a senior officer with a Fortune 100 company. And so it's there for you and other students like you. And what all the other panelists have shared is totally correct. Go for it and be successful, and we'll pray for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of the time and advice that you all have taken out today. I've taken a lot away from this conversation.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so great. And thank you so much, Jordan, and the panel for answering Jordan's questions. We have a couple more questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the next few minutes before we do the closing. So the next question is from Julie, and her question is, in regards to cancel culture, when a company is called out for lacking any kind of DEI, what do you think should be shown with actions to demonstrate atonement, or does the company get canceled?
I guess I'll just say quickly, I think Raymond said it very, very well. It's about your actions, about what you do, right? So if you do the right things, people are quick to remove that cancel stamp from you, I think.
Okay, so our next question is from Berlinda. Her question is, regarding microaggression, is there a role for formal training in the go forward strategy?
Oh, I'll jump in and say, yeah, I think formal training in anything always is helpful, right? And so I think from a corporate America, we do a lot of formal training. And so it's one piece, but it's what happens after that training. Is it a check the box? Okay, I did it. All right, good, got that training. You know, I had to do my compliance training this month, so okay, got that done. But then when it comes to harassment in the workplace, am I really taking that to heart? And do I know what to do? And do I know what to ensure? So it's yes, there's always a component, but then it's how do the individuals actually act and react after that training?
It absolutely has a role when you look at our strategic framework, but it's not more of formal training in the sense as well, depending on leveling. In terms of the executives, these are what we call critical conversations that we have, where we bring in junior employees or diverse employees so they can talk about what they're experiencing on a day-to-day to make the conversations a little bit more real. so our leaders have time to reflect on what they may or may not be doing to impact the employee experience. So it is a mix. There's the conversations, but there's also the formal classroom style training, but it absolutely has a place.
Any insight from Ron or Stasia?
All the other, comments were right on time. I would say also you can employ, or the company could employ outside consultants to come in and to help, correct and remediate some of the situations that the young lady was referring to. And that's done quite often. So third-party objective input would also be an ancillary tool that could be employed.
Okay, thank you so much for giving your valued input. And at this time, I would like to give a huge thank you to our esteemed panel, Stasia Washington, today's moderator, Ron Berryman, Raymond Hall, Kristen Wally, and Dr. Mark Tribbett for giving the welcoming remarks and also participating in the Q&A. Thank you so much for all the rich dialogue and the conversation that couldn't have happened without you. I would also like to thank our Dean of Students and Alumni Affairs, Dr. Bernice Ledbetter, who was on the call today, and our Senior Vice Chancellor, Mr. Rick Gibson. So with that, our event concludes, and I would wish you a wonderful rest of your day and afternoon, and thank you again to our panelists.